Close your eyes and picture Antarctica. You are probably seeing ice. Endless white, a few penguins, a wind that would kill you in minutes. Now, try to imagine more of it, and you just get more of the same. It feels like the one place on Earth that has always looked this way, and always will. That instinct is completely wrong, because buried under nearly 2 miles of ice, Antarctica is hiding a secret, and it is not a small one. This continent was once green. It had forests, it had rivers, and it had monsters. Here is the detail that should stop you. The largest land predator in Antarctica today is an insect, a wingless midge, roughly the size of an ant. That is the top of the food chain now. So the question that runs underneath this whole story is a simple one. When Antarctica was green, what stood where that little fly stands today? The answer is something you would never place on this continent in a million years. But before we can meet it, we have to explain how the coldest place on the planet ever grew a palm tree. To understand green Antarctica, you have to forget the map you know. Today, this continent is the loner of the 7, sitting by itself at the bottom of the world, sharing a border with no one. It was not always the outcast. For a huge stretch of deep time, it sat farther north, pressed up against South America and Australia, either joined outright or linked by land bridges that came and went. And that changes everything, because a bridge is an invitation. Animals walked across it, including the dinosaurs. We know this from something oddly specific. Researchers keep pulling sauropod skulls from the long-necked giants out of the ground in South America, Australia, and Antarctica, and they are nearly identical to one another. The same kinds of animals spread across 3 continents, because back then, those continents were close enough to walk between. Some of these travelers did not just pass through, they stayed. And they could stay because Antarctica was warm. During the age of dinosaurs, the continent sat at a gentler latitude. The whole planet ran hotter, and the average air temperature here hovered around 12 degrees Celsius. That is warmer than Germany is today. So instead of a bare white plain, picture rainforest. Conifers, ferns, ginkgos, and the first flowering plants, all crowded together under a low sun. Armored ankylosaurs, duck-billed hadrosaurs, meat-eating theropods, and those long-necked sauropods moved through the trees, while the water filled up with sharks and marine reptiles. If someone dropped you into this place, there would be no clue at all that you were standing on Antarctica. Then the sky fell. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs did not spare the bottom of the world. Antarctica most likely took a tsunami across its coast, a pulse of heat strong enough to cook anything caught in the open, and the wildfires that came after. And when the flames finally died, the relief did not last, because the planet began to freeze instead. Dust and sulfur choked the sky, the sun dimmed, and much of the world, Antarctica included, went cold. This is the part almost everyone would assume is the end. Antarctica freezes and stays frozen forever. That is not what happened. It recovered, and then it went further, climbing to a level of life it had never reached before. Here is the twist that catches people off guard. We think of our own era as the cold one, yet the Antarctica that rose out of the ashes may have ended up warmer than it ever was under the dinosaurs. The fires were long gone, and in their place came the opposite of an ice age, a super greenhouse. Carbon dioxide poured into the atmosphere from a source we still cannot fully pin down, and the temperature climbed. By the early part of an epoch called the Eocene, the Earth hit what may have been its hottest point in 100 million years. And in Antarctica, the numbers stopped sounding real. Along parts of the coast, mean temperatures sat comfortably in the low 20s Celsius, warm enough that winters stayed frost-free straight through the months of total polar darkness. Palm trees grew here, actual palms near the bottom of the world, standing alongside swamp cypress and water lilies. If you had washed ashore in Antarctica back then, you would have sworn you had landed on a tropical island. Ferns uncurled in the shade, and rain fell where today there is nothing but wind and dry snow. So we finally have our green world, which drags us right back to the question we started with. What was hunting in it? Remember, the top land predator today is a fly the size of an ant. Roughly 50 million years ago, it was something with a very different resume, a dinosaur. And I am not being cute. Not the classic kind, but the closest thing left after the classic kind vanished. A bird. And not a gentle one, a terror bird. These are animals famous for ruling South America, which is exactly the point because that land bridge south was still open on and off until maybe 40 million years ago. That gave terror birds a road down. Picture a bird taller than you with a huge curved beak built to tear prey apart, standing on powerful legs that ended in a sickle-shaped claw for pinning and stabbing. If that reminds you of a certain raptor from a certain movie, you are not far off. Now here is where honesty matters more than hype. The Antarctic terror bird is real, but the entire case for it rests on 2 toe bones. 2 claws found on Seymour Island, described only recently. From those, the size estimate comes out around 100 kilograms of predatory bird. Cautious scientists will not even commit to the exact family, but those claws point somewhere clear. On a continent where the mammals never managed to produce a large land hunter, a bird walked into the empty throne and became the apex predator on land. Which creates an obvious problem. A predator that size needs a lot to eat. So what was on the menu? To find the prey, we lean on one extraordinary place, a slab of rock on Seymour Island called the La Meseta Formation, which preserves a slice of this lost world across millions of years. Not everything in it lived at the same moment, but together it sketches out the cast. And the cast is strange, because it is not really Antarctic at all. It is South American, carried down that same land bridge. There were Astrapatheres, a vanished group of heavy, rhino-like plant eaters with oddly specialized teeth. Do not let the teeth fool you. These were vegetarians with bad dentistry. There were Litopterns, another lost lineage. And one of them, Notiolophos, is the largest land animal we can confirm from Antarctica since the dinosaurs, weighing about as much as a modern muskox. Another Litoptern, smaller but far weirder, had high openings in its skull that hinted a grasping trunk like a tapir's. Or maybe a strange filtering nose closer to a saiga antelope's, the kind that warms freezing air on the way in and screens out dust. There were Gondwanatheres, and there was a tiny insectivore nicknamed the saber-toothed squirrel for its enlarged front teeth, which earns a quiet bit of respect because its group had already lived through the asteroid and simply kept going. And then there were marsupials. This is one of those facts that quietly rearranges your mental map. When you picture a marsupial, you picture Australia. But marsupials evolved in South America first, and the way they reached Australia was by crossing through Antarctica, back when all 3 were joined. The pouched animals of the outback took their route through the future ice. One of their cousins is still alive today, a small creature in the forests of Chile and Argentina called the Monito del Monte, the little monkey of the mountain, a living scrap of that ancient crossing. So that is the terror bird's pantry, a South American menagerie, delivered to the bottom of the world by a bridge of land. But the bird was not the only thing hunting here. Some threats did not bother with the forest. They waited at the water. For a long time, paleontologists suspected crocodiles had lived in Antarctica. The warmth fit, the land bridges fit, but the proof stayed missing until someone finally found a single piece of armor. A large osteoderm, one of the bony plates set into a crocodile's skin, dated to the Eocene, and it was big enough to have come from an animal around 7 meters long, which would make it larger than the biggest saltwater crocodile ever measured. A second set of fossils nearby points to another croc, this one more specialized for catching fish. We do not know their exact names yet. What we do know is that when Antarctica was green, something with that build was sitting in the rivers, and probably along the brackish coast too, doing what crocodiles have always done, waiting. A predator like this does not need speed over distance. It needs one ambush, a single explosive lunge from the shallows, and the hunt is over. Which means every animal we have met so far, every plant eater that wandered down to drink, could disappear under the surface without a sound. Nowhere on land was truly safe. And yet the land, it turns out, was the calm part. Because now we move to the coast, and to the animal you would least expect to meet in a story about heat. Penguin. We tie them to ice so tightly that it feels wrong to put them anywhere warm. So here is a surprise. Penguins got their start in the heat. They most likely evolved off the coasts of Australia and New Zealand around 60 million years ago, then spread down to Antarctica and thrived. If the continent counts as a penguin stronghold now, back then it was closer to a penguin empire. Today, only 2 penguin species live here full time. During this warm stretch, the number was more like 10 to 14, all sharing one coastline, and a few of them were giants. The emperor penguin, the biggest alive today, tops out at about 1.2 meters and 40-odd kilograms. Impressive, right up until you meet its ancestors. Anthropornis and the aptly nicknamed mega penguin Paleudiptes klakowski reached body lengths of around 2 meters and weights near 115 kilograms. That is a penguin heavier than a jaguar. One careful note here, because it matters. Those 2-meter figures are measured from beak to tail, and we honestly do not know how upright these birds held themselves. So the accurate picture is not a penguin looming over you like a basketball player. It is a penguin that could look a grown adult straight in the eye and hit like something you would not want to be tackled by. Why did they get so large in the first place? The best guess is energy. A bigger body holds its heat better and dives deeper, and these giants may have been able to hold their breath for a very long time as they went after squid, fish, and krill. Today's emperor penguin is the shrunken heir of that lost dynasty, and even at that size, a giant penguin was not safe, because the second it slipped into the water, it stopped being the biggest thing around. The warm Antarctic Sea was, in a strange way, the most dangerous place in this entire world. Start with the whales, because they break your expectations too. One of them, Lanocetus, belonged to the baleen whale lineage, the gentle filter feeders that today include the humpback and the blue. Except this one still had teeth, real teeth, which it used to bite. Its skull was built a little like a modern beaked whale's, so it may have been a hybrid hunter, seizing larger prey with those teeth, while also sucking smaller animals straight into its mouth. Very little would have been safe near it. The only skeleton we have is a juvenile, and that youngster was already about 8 meters long, roughly the size of the largest orcas swimming today. So nobody knows how big the adults got. A second related species, known from just a handful of teeth, may have stretched to 12 meters. Sharing the water with them were archaic whales called basilosaurids, long and serpent-like predators of the shallows. And then there were the sharks. Prehistoric Antarctica had an exhausting roster of them, so many kinds that the sea here was almost the Australia of its day for sharks. Goblin sharks, six-gills, angel sharks, saw sharks, an early basking shark, and the ancestors of today's makos all turn up in these rocks. But one name towers over the rest. Not quite the megalodon, but close. Two of its direct relatives from the exact same genus, Otodus, prowled these coasts. The larger of them, Otodus auriculatus, reached around 9.5 meters. Not megalodon itself, but far more than enough to sit at the very top of everything. These sharks worked their way through fish, turtles, and other sharks. And the turtles here were no small target, running up to 3 meters long, bigger than any turtle alive today. Nothing in this water was off the menu, and that included the giant penguins. On land, the terror bird was the nightmare. In the sea, it had serious competition. There was one more place left to look: up. The Antarctic sky held a bird that looks, at first glance, like it has a mouth crammed full of teeth. It did not, at least not technically. These were pelagornithids, the bony-toothed birds, and the spikes lining their jaws were not teeth at all, but tooth-shaped growths of solid bone, which somehow makes them look even more unsettling. And they were huge. Wingspans stretched 5 to 6 meters, putting them among the largest flying birds that ever lived, in the same class as a small plane, or, if you prefer an older comparison, about the wingspan of a pteranodon. For all that menace, they were surprisingly delicate, with fragile bones, which probably kept them to skimming the sea surface and snatching fish and squid, rather than anything more ambitious. Antarctica may have mattered enormously to the story of birds as a whole. One of the oldest near-modern birds we know of, Vegavis, comes from here, and it raises a real possibility that the continent was a refuge where birds rode out the asteroid, which would help explain why so many of them flourished here afterward. So that was the lost world before the ice, a green, crowded continent that could kill you a dozen ways. It may have started with the final break. Antarctica finished separating from its neighbors, opening the Drake Passage toward South America and a second gateway toward Australia. That left the animals here stranded, which on its own would not be fatal, since the continent is enormous. The real killer was what the open water did. Around 34 million years ago, after more than 200 million years of a warm planet, the temperature fell off a cliff, and the cause is a bitter irony. Antarctica's isolation is the very thing that froze it. As those passages opened, a new current formed, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, a ring of cold water that still circles the continent today, blocking warm water from ever reaching the coast and pulling carbon dioxide out of the air. The first ice sheets appeared. This was the opening of a cold era that we are technically still living inside right now. The cold came too fast for most things to adapt, and the spreading ice erased habitat on a scale nothing could outrun. There were holdouts, patches of open ground where the last survivors clung on. But over the next 7 million years or so, the ice kept advancing, and the reprieve ran out. Worse, the ice fed on itself. White sheets bounced the sun's heat back into space, so the more Antarctica froze, the more reason it had to keep freezing. And it never really stopped. The continent settled into the frozen silence we know today, and it has barely changed since. If a single exposed island held all of this, what is still down there, sealed under nearly 2 miles of ice that no one has ever seen? Finding out would take more cold and more pain than most of us would ever sign up for. So for now, Antarctica keeps its lost world to itself.